Today we're going to be talking about the properties of real numbers and solving equations. There are a lot of different properties that we're going to be talking about today, so just make sure that you're paying attention to all of them, and we'll talk about which ones are important as well as we go. So the first property we have is the associative property of addition. That says that the quantity of A plus B plus C will be equal to A plus the quantity B plus C. So if we think about this with actual numbers that we know, we can say, all right, if we have the quantity 2 plus 3, and then we add 4 to that, well, 2 plus 3 is 5, 5 plus 4 is 9. That should be equal to 2 plus the quantity 3 plus 4. Well, 3 plus 4 is 7 plus 2 is 9. So that does work out. So that's the associative property of addition. There is also an associative property of multiplication, which would be the exact same thing that we just talked about except with multiplication. So A times the quantity B times C, that should be equal to the quantity A times B times C afterwards. Associative means you're associating with people. So you're going to keep things together if you're associating with people. The next property is the distributive property, and this is something that you probably are familiar with. That just says that if we have some number A on the outside and we multiply it to the quantity B plus C, we're going to take that value of A on the outside, and when we distribute it in, it gets multiplied by everything on the outside. So we would have AB plus AC. Again, that can work with numbers, letters. So if we had 3 times the quantity 7 plus 2, that means when we distribute this in, we would have 21 plus 6, which would equal 27. If we do 7 plus 2 first, that's 9. 9 times 3 is 27, so it does check out. The next property we have is the commutative property of addition. That says that if we have A plus B, that would equal B plus A. So we can switch those back and forth. Okay, that's the commutative property of addition. The same thing can happen for the commutative property of multiplication. So if we take A times B, that would be the same thing as B times A. So here, let's do an example for this multiplication one. If we take 2 times 3 and then flip it around and make it be 3 times 2, 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 2 is 6, doesn't matter. Same thing would happen when you're adding. So the commutative property is where you switch the order of them, keeping the operation the same in between them. The next property is the identity property of addition. That's where we're saying, okay, we take some number A, we add 0 to it, we're going to just get that same number back. So it's the identity because you're starting and ending with the exact same thing. We have that same property for multiplication. In this case, though, in order to start with something and end with it again, you should take that number, multiply it by 1, and that will give you that same thing. So any number times 1 is that same number. The next property we have is the inverse property of addition. That tells us that if we take a number, we add the opposite or the inverse of it, that would give us 0. So, for example, if we have 2 plus the inverse of positive 2 would be negative 2. If we add those two things together, we would get 0. Okay? The inverse property of multiplication says that if we take a number and multiply it by the reciprocal or its inverse, that would give us 1. So, for example, if we have 2/3, the reciprocal of that or the inverse of that number would be 3/2. And when we multiply 2/3 times 3/2, taking the long way, we would get 6/6, which does just give us 1. Next property is the symmetric property of equality. This just says that if A equals B, then B has to equal A. So if 2 equals 2, then 2 would equal 2. Same thing there, okay? We have a few more properties to talk about. These go for mostly when we're solving actual equations of things. So the addition property of equality is also going to be used for subtraction. We'll talk about that in just a second. So if A equals B, then A plus C would equal B plus C. So for example, if A was 2, that means B would have to be 2. So if I take 2 and I add 3 to it, well, since A and B are the same number, I would take 2 and add 3 to it again. We're going to get 5 on both sides. Okay, so if you add a number to both sides, that's the addition property of equality. We don't use subtraction because you could always add a negative, and then that would be your addition property of equality still. Same thing is going to happen for multiplication. There's a multiplication property of equality. It's also going to be used for division. So if we have A equaling B, again, they're the same number. If I take that number, whatever it is, and multiply it by something else, and do it to both sides, you're still going to be equal. Again, we don't use it for division. Instead of having division, we would multiply by the reciprocal, and that's going to give us the same thing. And then the last thing that we have is simplify as our last property here. And that just means that we're combining like terms, okay? So here if we have ax plus bx, we could combine that a and b together and combine like terms. So we're going to call that simplify. But if we have 3x plus 2x, those are like terms. So we're going to take those 3x's, 2x's, add them together, and we end with 5x's. So simplify is what we're going to call that. Now, let's talk about what properties are actually going to be important for us. So we're going to go ahead and star all of these. We need to really, really know these. The addition property of equality, again, also used for subtraction. Multiplication property of equality, also used for division. And simplify. Those are going to come up a lot in our pieces. Going back to our other properties that we had from before, the important ones here are going to be the distributive property. You're going to see that a lot. The symmetric property, you're going to see that a decent amount of time. Okay, so the ones that people typically confuse are these ones right here, the associative and commutative. Again, the way that I keep track of that, when I associate with other people, I'm keeping myself together with others, and that's going to give us our parentheses. So let's take a look at just a few examples here. So for each of these questions, we're going to name the property that each equation illustrates. Okay, it can be any of the ones that we've seen here. So if we have the equation 9 plus 7 equals 7 plus 9, they look the exact same on both sides. All we've done is we've taken the 9 and the 7, we've switched the order of them, but we've kept the addition symbol in between them. That's going to be the commutative property of addition. So I'm just abbreviating this commutative here and property, and then for addition just putting a plus sign, but you do need to say that it's the commutative property of addition. If you just say commutative property, it would not be correct. All right, so on this next question, we have the quantity d times 4 times 3. That's equal to d times the quantity of 4 times 3. Well, if we're looking here, the D, the 4, the 3, they're all staying in the same order with each other. We're just taking those parentheses and sliding them over. We're associating other things together. So that would be the associative property. In this case, since there's multiplication symbols in between them, that is going to be of multiplication. Again, that's another one that has for addition and multiplication, so you have to specify. Instead of doing this symbol for multiplication, you can also do an X for multiplication, so we don't think it's just a dot on your paper. That's up to you. The next one we have is P plus 0 equals P. So we're starting with a number, we're adding 0 to it, and we're ending with that exact same number. Whenever you start and end with the same thing, that's going to be our identity property. This is another one that has multiple operations that work with it. So since there's an addition sign here, we do need to say the identity property of addition. Last example here, we have 3 times the quantity x plus 4. That's going to equal 3x plus 12. So what happened here? Going from the left to the right, we noticed that there were parentheses on the left and not on the right. So it can't be the associative property that we used here before. But this number out front is going inside, and when we take 3 times x, we get 3x. When we take 3 times 4, we get 12. So that means that this would be the distributive property. You could say of equality if you want to, but it's not necessary in this case. So again, just to quickly recap with these, it's looking at those charts that we made, and it's seeing which ones are stated in the question. The important ones for us, distributive property. So if you have a number outside of parentheses and it goes inside, that's the distributive property, multiplying to the things. Symmetric property we're going to use when we're solving equations over here in the next few days. Okay. And then also with solving our equations, we're going to be using the addition property of equality, also for subtraction. Multiplication property of equality, again, also for division. And then simplifying is what you used to call combining like terms.